On a cold January afternoon in 1919, the North End neighborhood of Boston was unusually quiet. It was a working-class neighborhood filled with immigrants, laborers, dockworkers, and families who lived in tightly packed brick buildings along narrow streets. At the center of the neighborhood, near the waterfront, stood a massive steel storage tank, over 50 feet tall and nearly 90 feet wide, filled with a dark, sticky liquid that most people didn't think twice about. Inside that tank were over 2 million gallons of molasses. And on January 15, 1919, that tank exploded, unleashing a wave of molasses that moved through the streets at speeds estimated around 30 to 35 miles per hour, destroying buildings, flipping train cars, and killing 21 people. It remains one of the strangest and most deadly industrial disasters in American history. To understand why there was a massive tank of molasses sitting in the middle of Boston, you have to go back to the early 20th century, when molasses was an extremely valuable industrial product. Molasses was not just used for food. It was a key ingredient in the production of industrial alcohol, which was used in explosives, solvents, and other wartime materials. During World War I, the demand for industrial alcohol increased dramatically, and companies began storing massive quantities of molasses in large tanks near ports so it could be easily transported and processed. The tank in Boston was owned by the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, and it was built in 1915 by a subsidiary called the Purity Distilling Company. The tank was enormous, capable of holding 2.3 million gallons of molasses. It stood in a densely populated area, right near homes, businesses, and an elevated train line. From the beginning, there were problems with the tank. Residents in the neighborhood later reported that the tank leaked molasses almost constantly. Children would sometimes collect the dripping molasses in cups. The company painted the tank brown to try to hide the leaks. The tank had been built quickly and cheaply. It was constructed during a time when industrial demand was high and companies were rushing to build infrastructure as fast as possible. Later investigations found that the steel used in the tank was too thin and contained too much manganese, which made it more brittle. The tank had also never been properly pressure tested before being put into service. Instead of filling it with water to test for leaks and structural problems, the company filled it directly with molasses. By January 1919, the tank was nearly full. On January 12, just a few days before the disaster, a large shipment of molasses had been delivered into the tank, increasing the internal pressure significantly. At the same time, Boston was experiencing an unusual weather pattern. Temperatures had risen quickly from very cold to relatively warm in a short period of time. This temperature change may have caused the molasses to ferment, producing carbon dioxide gas inside the tank and increasing the pressure even more. At around 12:30 p.m. on January 15, people in the neighborhood reported hearing a loud rumbling noise, followed by a sharp cracking sound. The tank began to fail. Rivets popped out of the steel plates, and the entire structure ruptured. Witnesses later said it sounded like a machine gun as the rivets shot out in all directions. Then the tank collapsed completely. What came next was almost impossible to imagine. A massive wave of molasses, estimated to be about 25 feet high at its peak, rushed through the streets at incredible speed. Molasses is thick and sticky, but when released in such a huge quantity and under pressure, it moved like a fast-moving flood. The wave smashed buildings off their foundations, knocked over telephone poles, and lifted a section of the elevated train track. A train that had just passed through the area moments earlier would have been directly in the path of the wave. People were caught completely by surprise. Some were swept away instantly. Others were trapped in the sticky liquid and unable to move. Horses, which were commonly used for transportation and deliveries at the time, became stuck and panicked. Buildings collapsed under the pressure of the molasses, trapping people inside. Rescue efforts began almost immediately, but they were incredibly difficult. The molasses quickly began to cool and thicken in the winter air, turning into a heavy, sticky mass that was extremely hard to move through. Rescue workers struggled to walk through it. people who had been caught in the wave found it difficult to breathe once the molasses hardened around them. It took days for rescue crews to search the area completely. In total, 21 people were killed and around 150 were injured. The damage to the neighborhood was extensive. Buildings were destroyed, streets were flooded, and the cleanup effort took weeks. The harbor remained brown with molasses for a long time after the disaster. In the aftermath, the United States Industrial Alcohol Company tried to claim that the disaster had been caused by anarchists who had sabotaged the tank. This was a time in American history when there was widespread fear of anarchist attacks, and the company attempted to shift the blame away from itself. But residents of the neighborhood knew that the tank had been poorly built and had been leaking for years. What followed was one of the first major class action lawsuits in American history. Over 100 people sued the company for damages. The legal case lasted for years and involved hundreds of witnesses and massive amounts of testimony. Engineers, construction experts, and workers all testified about the poor design and construction of the tank. In 1925, after years of legal battles, the court found that the tank had been improperly designed and constructed, and that the company was responsible for the disaster. The United States Industrial Alcohol Company was ordered to pay damages to the victims and their families. The case became an important moment in American legal history because it helped establish the idea that companies could be held responsible for negligence in large industrial accidents. The Great Molasses Flood led to major changes in building codes and industrial safety regulations in Boston and across the United States. After the disaster, new laws were introduced that required engineers and architects to review and approve plans for large structures, and for those structures to be inspected during construction. These kinds of regulations are now standard, but at the time, they were not. Today, the Great Molasses Flood sounds almost unbelievable, like something from a strange novel rather than real life. But it happened in a major American city, in the middle of the day, and it killed 21 people. The disaster is a reminder of what can happen when companies cut corners, ignore safety concerns, and prioritize speed and cost over proper engineering and testing. It is also a reminder of how different the world was just over 100 years ago. Industrialization was moving quickly, technology was advancing, and companies were building bigger and bigger infrastructure, but safety regulations had not yet caught up. Many of the safety standards that exist today were written only after disasters like this one forced governments to take action. Even today, more than 100 years later, some people in Boston say that on very hot summer days, you can still smell a faint scent of molasses in the North End neighborhood where the tank once stood. Whether that part is myth or reality, the story of the Great Molasses Flood remains one of the strangest industrial disasters in history, and a powerful example of how a series of small decisions, ignored warnings, and poor engineering can lead to a catastrophe that no one could have imagined, until it was too late.